What is up, everybody? You're back with another episode of the Chronically Motivated Project, where we talk about effective thinking and how to get over some of the hardest stuff you'll ever go through in life. I really had no topic for today. I was going to the gym with my girlfriend, and we're talking about, possible topics, and the holidays came up, and we're thinking about what are some of the situations people go through during the holidays. Of course, there's the financial issue, but then we came on the topic of being lonely or being alone, and then just general loneliness. And we were throwing back some ideas here and there, talking about why people are afraid of being alone, and I started to really dig into what loneliness is. And I'll tell you this: loneliness is not the opposite of relationship. That is so far from the truth, I can't even explain it. Actually, I can, and I'm going to. Loneliness is a lack of intimacy. And when I say intimacy, I don't mean just sexual intimacy. I mean a lack of closeness, a lack of genuine connection, a lack of togetherness. It can be with your significant other, but it can also be with your friends or your family, or even your professional life, your boss, or your coworkers. Loneliness is a lack of intimacy. It's a lack of understanding, and almost a sense of disenfranchisement from a person or a group. Everyone has felt lonely, I'm sure, at one point of your life or another, and if you haven't, I promise you will. It's a feeling of emotional isolation, or a sensation of, just being isolated from a person or from a group and just not being understood. The funny thing about loneliness, and the terrible thing about loneliness, is that it literally kills. Emotional isolation ranked just as high as smoking as a risk factor for mortality, death. Emotional isolation. As human beings, we need to feel accepted and wanted and desired. And we need to feel that sense of intimacy with someone. Whether it is a significant other, a friend, or even a family member, we crave that sense of intimacy. And when we don't get it, it affects us, not just mentally, but also physically. Even with diabetes, it can affect your blood sugars, causing the stress and all the cascading effects of problems. Emotional isolation and loneliness can literally kill people and eat away at them their entire life. Now, where does this loneliness really start? I'm going to point my finger at schools like I usually do, because we're taught in school all these things that we're supposed to carry through life. We're just not taught the most effective way possible. Too bad schools didn't have my podcast back in the day, right? Schools trivialize social pain, but not physical pain. Think about it. You're taught that you're not allowed to hit other kids. That's bad. But they don't really teach you that you're not allowed to exclude other kids. A lot of times they don't step up. Now, some teachers do, and kudos to those teachers who are amazing and look past the books and look into the social activity. Again, super credit to you guys who really go above and beyond. A lot of teachers don't look at the social interaction. They don't look at the kids being excluded and put off to the side. The kids that aren't engaging in that intimacy as friends and as peers. Those kids who are excluded, they learn this sense of loneliness beginning in life, and then it compounds. It has this compounding effect and just gets worse and worse, and they grow up to learn and accept that lonely is a way of life, and almost that it's out of their control. That sucks. It's such a crappy feeling. I can't imagine kids going through that. I say I can't imagine it, but I was one of those kids, and I'll talk about that in a second. But being alone, learning to be alone, that can be a great thing. You don't have to date every single person you talk to, I promise you. You don't have to become best friends with every single person you work with or every single person you meet. And sometimes friends and relationships end. And that's okay to be in those periods of being alone. Those are great times to reflect and grow personally. But that is not true loneliness. True loneliness is a lack of intimacy. You know, when we talk about loneliness, I'm not talking about a temporary feeling. I'm not talking about, what people confuse it with. Loneliness is confused with a breakup or an ended friendship or job or even a death in the family, mourning. People confuse it. They think they're going through this problem that isn't common, which usually is. They're going through this problem like a disease or relationship problems. That's not loneliness. Not having a date is not loneliness. Loneliness is a chronic total detachment of intimacy. It's the feeling of isolation, the constant feeling of isolation by those closest to you. It's the feeling of not fitting in and enduring that feeling over and over and over. That's true loneliness. Have you ever been in a room full of people and felt alone? Because I know I have. Some of my most lonely times have been with the most people. And I would almost be, looked down upon if I said I felt lonely, because how could you be lonely with all these people, with all these friends, with all this environment? It's a party, it's a event. How could you possibly be lonely? Well, I had that feeling growing up, and I still face that problem from time to time. Imagine being a kid with a disability. I'm already different, so I feel different. I felt excluded, or I didn't feel that sense of closeness of kids who didn't deal with that issue. I didn't like sports. As a guy who doesn't like sports, I already feel, unable to connect on certain levels with certain people. I never had tons of friends. I was never that guy who always had those people who were friends. Like, a lot of people might have known me and said hi to me, but I never had that true intimate connection with more than one or two people my entire life. That's just how I was. And yeah, there were some times where I really felt alone. I could be surrounded by all these people and still feel almost emotionally numb because I know it's not real. I really knew loneliness on a deep, deep level. And I allowed it to take me down some really dark areas. Again, I'm saying I allowed it to because it didn't force me to. I chose to see it that way, and I did some really dumb stuff because of it. It wasn't until I realized that I could control my perspective and I could control a few things about that loneliness that really made an impact. The first thing people need to realize is that you need to take a step back and see, are you truly lonely, or is the way you're thinking and the way you're talking and acting and interacting making you feel lonely? Communication is one of the most effective tools I've learned to get rid of that lonely feeling, that sense of loneliness, that lack of intimacy. Because sometimes people communicate intimacy differently. They communicate on a different level or through different mediums in different ways. If you're only looking to receive the intimacy you want in one way and you're not getting it, of course you're going to feel lonely. But that's also because you're blinding yourself to the other possibilities and the other perspectives of how that other person, whether it's your family, significant other, or friend, might be sharing their intimacy with you. So sometimes we feel like, oh, nobody loves me. No one understands me. Those are negative perspectives that are going to keep you in that state of loneliness. And those perspectives are controlled by you. So sometimes communication really helps. Learning to communicate effectively and identify how other people communicate differently, probably the biggest tool I've learned to reduce that feeling of loneliness. Also, perspective. How do you see yourself? And how do you separate your temporary desires? You know, when you want, a lot of people want a relationship. They crave intimacy, but they just want to fill the void with a person, not the right person. Same thing with friends. They want to be surrounded by people, so they go out and drink. But what they really crave is someone to understand them, someone to talk with them on a real level, not someone to just drown their problems. Of course you're going to feel lonely, and you're especially going to feel lonely when you add substances in the mix to try and numb the problems that you're currently facing. Instead of dealing with them, you're hiding them, and they're going to come back and bite you in the ass. Trust me, I've been there. That leads to authenticity. Being authentic is a necessity in order to communicate with someone effectively, in order to break down that loneliness wall that you're kind of creating. What I mean is, imagine yourself going into a room full of people that you don't know, but everyone else knows each other. Instantly, you're going to feel like an outcast. You're going to feel a sense of loneliness. You're going to feel a sense of, lack of understanding. You're going to feel definite lack of intimacy with people because they already have that connection and you don't. So you start judging yourself on how you look and how you're presenting yourself and what you're saying, and making sure you're saying the right things. Whether the right things are who you are or not, you are acting according to how you feel in this state of loneliness or isolation. This lack of authenticity will never allow you to actually be that person you're trying to be, or to get that relationship you're trying to connect with. If you're performing, you're never going to be happy. You're never going to feel that connection or that intimacy you're craving. Same thing with a relationship or a new relationship. If your goal is to woo your partner, or to take them on an amazing date, or say all the right things, even when the right things aren't necessarily true or authentic or genuine, you might win them over, but all you're doing is hurting yourself, because you're disallowing yourself to feel that intimacy with them that you're trying to create, because you're faking it. And in the beginning, that might feel good, but over time, you're going to realize that all you did was create another situation without intimacy, which leads to the feeling of loneliness. And I was very guilty of that for a long time. It's very hard to be vulnerable, very hard to break down your walls. A good friend of mine, Jiggy, who's an awesome speaker, she has a shirt called "Vulnerability is Dope." It's really hard, especially as a guy, to break that barrier of being vulnerable enough to be real, to be authentic, to be aware of what you truly want. It's a hard feeling, especially for the stigma that guys have, But it's not a performance. How you interact with people, and the people you love, and the people you're trying to be genuine with, if you're performing, you're never going to be real. And if you're not real, you're most likely going to feel lonely, because it's all an act. And sometimes you have to take action. Sometimes there's people in your life who just don't give you the intimacy you need. They're not emotionally available, whether it's a friend or a family member or someone you really want to be with. Sometimes things don't work out. And if they're not emotionally available to you, if they're not emotionally able to give you the intimacy you desire, sometimes you need to cut that cord. That's the reality of life. In the long run, it's just going to hurt both of you to fake this intimacy, or to feel lonely for a long period of time is going to damage you as a person. Not to mention hurt the other person as well, because they're probably looking for the same thing. It's hard to do, but it's true. Sometimes you need to cut the cord. People fear being alone, so they settle for people, or they settle for something. They settle for a friend that isn't genuine, or a person that isn't what they really want, but they just want to fill a void. So people are so afraid of being alone, they'll settle. But what they don't realize is true loneliness happens even in the presence of a significant other or a friend, due to the lack of genuine intimacy. It's masking a false fear of being alone while creating a real problem of removing intimacy. So the problem you're truly afraid of is being created by you because you're afraid of being alone. But the most alone you will ever feel is with someone you don't share an intimate connection with. The most alone you will ever feel is in a room full of people who truly don't care about you. The most alone you will ever feel is when you're not authentic with yourself and with the people around you. True loneliness is a lack of intimacy, and it can be fixed with the way you communicate and the way you perceive things, but ultimately by the way you act and react. Loneliness can be conquered through your thoughts and actions, but you have to be real. You have to be authentic, and you have to be vulnerable. That wraps up today's Chronically Motivated podcast, project, post. Wherever you're seeing this, whether it's on YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or anything like that, make sure you like and subscribe, and make sure you share. I will be back tomorrow with Trash Talk Tuesday, and we are going to destroy Black Friday. I can't wait. I've been waiting since last week, and I really can't wait to talk about that. If you have any comments on today's podcast or before tomorrow's podcast, please let me know, and I will be glad to mention them. Until then, I will talk to you guys later.